Hello and welcome to Dialogue. A UN official has said that almost 25,000 Palestinians have reportedly been killed during the ongoing Israel and Hamas conflict in Gaza, and the majority have been women and children. In related development, EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell has accused Israel of financing Hamas in an attempt to weaken the Palestinian Authority, adding that only a two-state solution imposed from the outside would bring peace between the two sides. At the same time, multiple strikes and attacks took place throughout the region over the past weeks. As international pressure seems to be mounting, is Israel to end its military operation in Gaza anytime soon? Are we witnessing the conflict spilling over into the rest of the region? And is a two-state solution still a possibility or completely off the table? Join us for the discussion live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today, Dr. Sara Yael Hirschhorn, visiting professor at University of Haifa, and Tangen, senior fellow of Taihe Institute, and Kawa Hassan, non-resident fellow in MENA Program of Stimson Center, and Professor Yossi Mekelberg, associate fellow in MENA Program of Chatham House. Welcome to Dialogue. So, Dr. Hirschhorn, I will start with you. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu recently said that, as Israel's major military goals haven't been achieved yet, the fight against Hamas is likely to continue until 2025. But will Israel ever achieve its goals in Gaza? That includes destroying the Hamas.
Well, Benjamin Netanyahu has every reason to want the war between Israel and Gaza to continue, or between Israel and Hamas to continue, only because he knows that the moment the emergency crisis of the war ends, so will his position in the prime ministership. And we see a bit of a moving target now as more and more progress, frankly, has been made in destroying Hamas infrastructure and decapitating Hamas leadership, of what the end goal of the Israeli operations will be. Some of his colleagues over the weekend signaled that there were competing goals that were at odds with each other. One was the destruction of Hamas, and the other would be rescuing the hostages, the 130 hostages that are still being held in Hamas captivity, including, infants and elderly men and women. So I think Netanyahu needs to make a strong and brave decision, which is, what are the most proximate and realistic war aims that can be achieved, also without losing international and particularly American support, which seems to be dwindling for this critical and intensive phase of the war. Whether the hostages can indeed be rescued, or this will require some kind of comprehensive hostage release deal that will require a cessation or at least a pause of the hostilities. And really what the future of Israel's involvement will be in Gaza. Will there be an occupation of Gaza following the military offensive, or will we be transitioning to some other kind of arrangement? But certainly Netanyahu has reasons not to want to answer these questions too quickly, because he knows that his political career hangs in the balance.
Okay, can you talk more a little bit about that? Netanyahu's political career. Is that because his fight against Hamas is popular and he needs that kind of support? Or what's the reason?
Well, his fight against Hamas has been broadly popular. I mean, this has been seen as a war to restore national deterrence, and certainly a necessity after the southern communities of Israel were virtually overrun by Hamas terrorists on 10/7. But we've now reached a phase of the war where the main stated goals, which were removing Hamas material, rockets and tunnels, and decapitating Hamas leadership, has, been accomplished to a substantial, if not a complete degree. So the original war aims that Netanyahu and the war cabinet stated have now been, at least somewhat achieved. The question I think that the Israeli public is now most concerned about is, what is going to happen to the hostages, because we've been over 50 days since another tranche of hostage release, and how long can this war really go on? His popularity has dwindled to its lowest number ever, and most Israelis, if were asked today, would like to go to new elections.
Yeah, from outside, we see that the UN has reported 25,000 civilian Palestinians were killed. So Anna here, with the majority of those being killed are women and children. Obviously, there's let's say mounting pressure in that respect. So is that going to have any impact in terms of affecting the ongoing conflict there, or whether there will be some pressure to end the conflict as soon as possible?
Well, what's happening is you're seeing a very sharp division between the developed countries, not all, but those that are backing Israel, and the rest of the world. All you have to do is read through the condemnations that were given country by country to these UN resolutions, and you'll see quite clearly that the world is not in favor of these women and children being killed. They understand. Hamas is a terrorist organization. They committed a terrorist act that does not justify the killing of 25,000 people, most of whom are women and children, because you want to get at the bad actors. That's horrendous. It's the kind of thing that Israel was oppressed, during the Second World War, and now they've become the oppressor. And that is in the eyes of most of the world. And I'm talking about landmass, peoples, markets, production, you name it.
Mm-hmm. Well, European Union Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell, as we reported earlier, said that the way Israel is carrying out its war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip is, quote, seeding hate for generations, end quote. Also, what he said is, we have in mind what Hamas is, what Hamas has done, and certainly we reject and we condemn. But the peace and stability cannot be built only by military means and not in this particular way of using military means. So Mr. Hassan, so what's the message here? Are we seeing mounting pressure from the EU here?
There's definitely a mounting pressure on Israel, and I agree also with the former, speaker that indeed, the world by and large is really appalled by what's going on in Gaza. The horrible terrorist attack of 7th of October doesn't justify, the killing of tens of thousands of civilians in Gaza, mostly women and children. So there is definitely here in the, in the European Union, in Europe in general, a growing popular, protest, but also at the level of governments and civil society. But the issue with EU, as you may know, is always EU is divided. It needs to arrive at a consensus to come up with a credible policy. And we are not there yet, but definitely there is a growing pressure and also growing condemnation for the way Israel is conducting its war in Gaza. Here in Europe and in the European Union.
Mm-hmm. Well, beyond that, it seems, Professor Mekelberg have here with us, the Borrell also openly criticized Israel, that Hamas has been financed by the Israeli government to try to undermine the Palestinian Authority of Fatah. This idea has been floating for some time, but this is probably the first time a senior official in the position as high as Borrell is, raising such an issue. What's the impact? Why would Borrell make these comments now?
Well, probably should have made these comments long before, as I think the world should have been appalled by the conditions in Gaza before 7th of October. Maybe if we actually addressed all of this issue before 7th of October, we would not have been in this situation. But here we are, we're in this situation and we need to address it. And the reality is, Borrell is absolutely right. Netanyahu's paradigm of divide and rule between the Fatah and the Hamas and between the West Bank and Gaza, all aimed at preventing a two-state solution from ever becoming a reality, preventing an independent Palestinian state from happening, a collapse in a matter of few hours on October 7. Now we need actually to deal with the repercussions of what happened on 7 October in the last few months. As the previous speakers mentioned, it's completely unacceptable the way that Israel conducts the war in Gaza. Yes, Hamas is a terrorist organization, yet it's also a political organization. It's also an ideology, and political movement and ideology you encounter with more attractive political movement and ideology, and that's probably what we should do now, including for the European Union. It's not only enough to criticize. It's not enough, Borrell is not an observer, he's a politician. And as a politician, he needs to come with policies. So the EU should come with policies. Here we in the UK, we should come with policies. And above all, we need to see the US, Israel, and the Palestinians come with policies which shows that they draw the right lessons from the last 3.5 months.
Dr. Sara Hirschhorn, is this accusation based on evidence, or is it true? If it's true, what is the purpose or what is the goal of Israeli government by, say, financing Hamas?
Well, look, first of all, we should be clear that it's something of a canard that was suggested that Israel was directly financing Hamas. The truth was that Israel was turning a blind eye as Qatar and other countries were providing essentially suitcases full of, cash and being brought into the Gaza Strip. So they were very, very knowledgeable of the fact that Hamas was receiving outside funding. And Israel, of course, does pay certain kinds of remittances for services and taxes that are that Palestinians, Palestinians are responsible to the state of Israel. But it wasn't as if, Netanyahu was, personally handing off a suitcase of cash to Yahya Sinwar. So we need to be a bit careful about how we describe this. But certainly there was an effort by Netanyahu, I think, to divide and conquer, as Professor Mekelberg suggested. And further, that Netanyahu, I think, we must say the entire military and intelligence establishment alongside Netanyahu seemed to misunderstand the intentions of Hamas, that they were not modifying their positions in any certain way, or that the financing or general, rapprochement or temporary ceasefires that were happening indicated some kind of ideological moderation. Then in fact it was a long-term game of even preparing for 10/7, which we know was in the works for several years before the attack actually occurred. But I think we should also point to the fact that Palestinian agency is lacking in this discussion, which is that the Palestinian Authority and Hamas also were unable to unify during this period of time. They had several talks that broke down over the course of the last 5 years alone. And this is relevant also to understanding why this divide and conquer method worked so well, is because they also were unwilling or unable to reach some kind of internal Palestinian agreement to move the Palestinian national cause forward on a diplomatic or other plane.
So, Mr. Hassan, what's your take of Borrell's remarks? Is this a change of attitudes simply to probably creating pressure on Israelis, on Netanyahu, for the purpose of ending the conflict over there? Or is it an accusation, or serious accusation of it's Israel or is the Israeli government to blame for what is happening?
I think primarily is really it signals the frustration of Borrell and EU. And also the inaction of EU, the absence of EU since the start of the war, in October. And for the reasons I said, that EU is divided, is weak. It has lost really much of its credibility in the region, but still EU can play a very, a good role, be a force for good in the region. And I think particularly because of their growing popular pressure to end the war in Gaza, but also because of the role of EU as one of the biggest donors to support reconstruction along with other countries from the Arab Gulf countries, post-war in Gaza. So I think it's to me, it's a signal of frustration, but also to, now say to Israel that yes, you have right to, respond to the terror attack of October the 7th, but Israel and particularly Netanyahu played a role, we could differ about how deep that role was in influential, but I think did play a role in strengthening Hamas at the expense of the Palestinian Authority, basically by applying, the basic rule of divide and rule, and that, but also in the end, Israel failed. October 7th was primarily an intelligence failure for Israel to reading, the long-term strategy of Hamas, despite, despite their information and intelligence on the inner working of Hamas.
Anna, if you look at the responses now or remarks from governments, even from Western countries, European countries, including Borrell, of course, and now there are, scholars are calling for Biden, the U.S. president, to cut Netanyahu loose. So are you seeing the dwindling support for Netanyahu or for Israel in terms of their military operation in Gaza here?
Well, I think you have to separate Israel from Netanyahu. Netanyahu, I would agree with Sara, is an opportunist. He is, if he is in fact removed from office, there's a good chance he'll go to jail. He's addicted to the power. He has shown that he will do almost anything. He reviled against the very groups of people he now cooperates with in his government. But you have to put this in context. This began, in the 1800s as an experiment by the British to insert one group of people into another area, and it was bound to not go well. And since that time, you just have these cycles of war, violence, displacement, anger, and it continues. Terrorism is the logical outcome. I'm not condoning it, I'm just condemning it. But I'm telling you, if you keep pushing somebody, they will do extreme things in defense of what they think is their country. And unfortunately, as some of my guests have pointed out, you can maybe kill the man, but you're not going to kill the idea. Just think about it this way. 2.4 million people, half of them children under 18. How easy is it going to be to radicalize them, having seen, tens of thousands of people killed, many of them they know, many injured. The next, grouping of whatever it is, Hamas or whatever radical group is out there, is going to be, instead of 30 or 40,000, it's going to be 300 or 400,000. This kind of cycle of violence is not being addressed. It was by one of my colleagues, but the fact is, this is not the end of this. And this idea that somehow having a ceasefire is going to make everything okay isn't. This has very, very deep roots. These people are wedded to their ideas. On one hand, you have settlers, you have Palestinians who, date back hundreds and hundreds of years to pieces of land where their relatives were growing whatever they were doing, vines or crops. On the other side, you have settlers who are as equally extreme as Hamas, who are coming in and pushing these people out. So until these groups are removed from power and put where they should be, on the fringes, or put to the side, and the middle comes forward and says, we want a solution that brings peace, not just to this generation, but to future generations, you're not going to have anything, not a two-state solution, just a continuum of war.
Well, speak of the two-state solution, speak of addressing this issue long-term. Professor Mekelberg, of course, Josep Borrell also talked about this two-state solution, imposing it from outside. Obviously, he's referring to it seems it's not working by the two sides directly involved. Then what's your comments, from outside, by whom, from where? What about the implementation? How to impose this two-state solution from outside?
It is not just about imposing it. It's also actually ensuring that both Israelis and Palestinians buy into this idea, at least a critical mass there. And I think we should work before the technicalities of a two-state solution. We need to talk about the values of two-state solution. The idea that everyone, Israelis and Palestinians, enjoy the same rights, the same political rights, the same human rights, the same civil rights, the right of both for self-determination, dealing with Jerusalem as the capital of both, or recognition in their sovereignty and the right to have capital. and of course addressing the refugees issue. And then we are accepting that all these values of equality, of rights for everyone, from this, then we can look for one solution or another. Now, the Oslo Agreement envisaged a peace based on separation. As a result of Israel expanding settlements now between East Jerusalem and the West Bank, there are 700,000. It makes kind of separation in the way that Oslo envisaged almost impossible. So we need to look into different modalities of a two-state solution. One idea that is floating, and I think there is a lot in it, is the idea of an Israeli-Palestinian confederation, which is basically a two-state solution in a one-state reality, but accepting again the same values of rights. So, but again, I think what the international community should do is actively encourage both sides to understand that this is the best in their own interest.
To encourage both sides. Dr. Sara Hirschhorn, of course, the focus now is on the Netanyahu government, who basically refused to accept this two-state solution. But on the other side, and people often also point out the Palestinians, probably the majority, they neither won't, will accept this two-state solution. Is that the case?
I think that there was a video that was just published of Khaled Mashal speaking openly about his rejection of the two-state solution this week. So I think he and Netanyahu, who may not be the leaders in charge of either of their respective national movements, but in their case, right now they are, and both of them for the long term have rejected a two-state solution. We should say that Netanyahu's remarks last week were, I think, taken a bit out of context when he was speaking about control over the Jordan Valley Rift. But certainly there is unlikely to be progress from either of these leaders. So we'll have to wait for another turn of elections in Israel, certainly. But amongst the Palestinians, a new generation of leadership or new kinds of leaders who may emerge from these events to determine a path forward. But I do think that an imposition of a plan from outside, which was just discussed, where neither Israelis nor Palestinians are directly engaged in at least the very initial phases of a discussion about a two-state solution, is just dead on arrival, because the concept that other, particularly Arab partners, will decide on behalf of Israelis and Palestinians what their future will look like, I think is unsustainable for either community. These are national movements, and they want to have a say in their own national affairs. So I don't know what leaders will be capable of taking both Israel and Palestine down a road towards a two-state solution, but I don't think it can come from outside of their communities. Mr. Hassan, is it still a viable option, two-state solution? And also, we are hearing some of the Arab states basically conditioning the normalization of relationship with Israel on these two-state solutions. How likely is that?
Well, I think the events since October 7th have shown that Oslo Accord has failed. Normalization between Arab countries and Israel without, bringing in the Palestinian issue and be part of the, kind of an overall solution also failed. So as it stands right now, there is no alternative to a two-state solution. Maybe a two-state solution in a one-state reality like confederation, also a very interesting idea. But as it stands right now, and given the carnage that has been, created and the havoc in Gaza, but also, the impact of 7th October on the Israeli society, I don't see any other alternative other than a two-state solution, even if it's a temporary, arrangement. I think that is also that's recognized also by Arab countries. And also, there used to be an Arab initiative from 2002, initiated by the Arab League, led by Saudi Arabia. Unfortunately, at the time, it was rejected by Israel. I think that could be revisited. Saudi Arabia and other countries are ready to normalize with Israel, provided also a Palestinian state, will be established, a viable Palestinian state, not only a nominal Palestinian state, So in conclusion, I think, at this stage, I don't see any other alternative to a two-state, solution, provided there is international will to push that. But also, as some of my colleagues said, we should create the conditions for that, both in Israel and in Palestine, so that both societies and leadership will accept it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Einar, let's look at the issue beyond the Palestine-Israeli conflicts here. Of course, we are seeing, strikes, attacks, Red Sea, and also Iranian attacks in different countries, Iraq, Syria, and Pakistan. And recently, there's a ballistic missile attack on the base, U.S. military base in Iraq, and the U.S. is talking about, basically retaliation. Are we seeing, say, spillover effects of the Gaza conflict? And how serious is it?
Well, it's very serious. I mean, Hamas lit the fuse. They understood that by creating this terrorist attack, they would put everything on pause, which is what they wanted. They did not want to have a normalization or relations between the other Arab states and Israel. They've successfully done that. Now you see Hezbollah. They want to also be on this kind of tip of the spear in terms of rejecting U.S. and Israel. Now, what do they all have in common? They're backed by Iran. So, at this point, you have a large regional player, Iran, which has many, many different forms, and both Shia and Sunni sides. What they have in common is they're all angry, and they all want to change things, and they're willing to use violence to do it. And what do you have on the U.S. side? A country that believes that bullets and bombs solves everything, although it hasn't to date. They're still not willing to give up trying.
Well, Professor Mekelberg, should we be concerned with, people have talked about a region-wide war. Should we be concerned with that kind of possibility or likelihood even?
I think we should be very concerned because in a way we are already in the midst of some level of regional conflict. When you have missiles flying by the Houthis in Yemen and blocking or slowing down shipping in the Red Sea, Hezbollah in Israel, and Israel in Syria, and American attack in Damascus, and attacks in Iraq. This is already on some level. We are in the midst of such conflict. The real danger, and not to mention also rivalries that emerge in between Iran and Pakistan. So we should be worried. I think generally it shows the failure of the collective security, global collective security, as was formed after 1945. We need to readdress it. Two, we are not actually addressing root causes of conflict, and when something happens, it pushes to the surface other conflict within the region, as it happens in other parts of the world. So this is source of concern. What is important now is to diffuse, and one of the first steps towards diffusing it is a ceasefire in Gaza. But this is not going to resolve all the other issues unless we actually attend to them.
Ceasefire in Gaza in order to defuse a potential regional war over there. Many thanks to our guests. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Again, a big thank you to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. Thank you for being with us. I'm Xu Qinduo. See you next time.